The Continental Divide, Chapter 3, Just a Casual Day in a Sci-Fi Film, written and narrated by Kylie Cecil. They were now within sight of the facility, as dusk was coming to an end to be replaced by true night. "Is that the place you stay?" "Yeah, it's the second one we know of." "We?" Wolfram questioned. "Long story. I'll tell you about it more once we're inside. I don't want to be caught out here after dark. Not that it isn't pretty much dark already." Wolfram began watching his surroundings and becoming more skittish towards everyday sounds in the forest. Chiron accidentally kicked a pebble into a rock, causing it to clank fairly loudly as Wolfram jumped. "You okay?" Chiron asked, looking at Wolfram, who was visibly distressed. "Boy, I can assure you that I have every reason to be afraid of the dark." "Oh," Chiron said as his gut knotted up. "Let's jog, we're almost there." "I don't know if I can. I'm old, and I don't exactly have the strength I did in my youth." "I think you can at least try if you don't want Carmen finding us." Wolfram shook his head once as his neck cracked. He balled his fists and began picking up the pace, as did Chiron. However, Chiron ensured to keep the same pace to not leave him behind. "Does she have a time that she usually appears?" Chiron asked. Wolfram was breathing harder as he said, "Not that I've noticed, but her visits have become more often." "Why hasn't she killed you yet?" "I don't know, son. I wish I knew." "When does she usually disappear?" "I normally pass out before anything begins, so I don't know. Maybe she wants me awake when she kills me to make me suffer for my mistakes." Chiron reflected on this as they approached the facility. Wolfram slowed when they were in the clearing and noticed the 10-foot radius of dead earth around the building. "Why is it like this? There's a strange energy coming from this place," Wolfram mentioned. "It runs off of electricity somehow. Maybe that's what you're sensing," Chiron suggested. "I don't know what that is, but let's get inside before it gets any darker." Chiron and Wolfram approached the door. Wolfram glanced around and stopped momentarily at the bones, lying about in the dirt circle before they made their way in. Chiron shut the door behind them as he removed his backpack, dropping it to the floor, then leaned up against the wall and scooted down until he reached the floor with a heavy sigh. Wolfram remained standing as he had a look around the room they were in. "It's bright in here. Good. It puts off just as much light in here as near water when the sun is at its peak in the sky. What kind of candles are these?" he asked as he referenced a light bulb in the ceiling above. Those are called light bulbs. They've been around for a long time. If my memory serves me right, they work by heating up a coil or filament until it glows, but it has to be inside glass or it won't work." "Interesting," Wolfram said as he stared at the light with his hands on his hips. "Where's the power come from it to heat up like that?" Then Chiron stopped. How was the facility receiving power? That's probably classified as well, he thought with a childish tone. "I don't know about these facilities, but the buildings back home, they were powered by electricity. The electricity comes from power grids, which are huge metal contraptions that create power using a current. I don't really know much more really about that." "That's something else," Wolfram said as he peered at Chiron. "Is that the energy you were feeling? The electrical current?" Chiron asked. "Perhaps. I don't know much about how it works, but maybe. It could still be something else, but this electricity is foreign to me." "Wait, I thought you time traveled." "I did." "Then how have you not stumbled across this before?" Wolfram shrugged. "I've only been traveling in one spot in different times and dimensions. I suppose it's just not where I was in the present. Don't rightly know." "You can only travel to the same actual spot?" "That's right. I'm not a novice at dabbling, but I'm no master. Masters can travel elsewhere or anywhere they really desire. I have only met one master in my lifetime, but he was an awful strange fella. He gave everyone he came across a bad feeling when he was nearby. I did not acquaint myself with him when he was passing through our village. Did anyone else know he was a dabbler? No. They would have tried to burn him at the stake or kill him in some form or fashion. I knew because I sensed him. The normal folk got bad feelings from him, as did I, but you know a dabbler when you feel them, if you are one yourself, of course. Did you speak to him? Only briefly, when he was leaving. I moseyed my way over to him, where we were away from others listening. He did not have much to say. He was uninterested in me and wanted to go on his way, so I let him. What'd he say? I asked him if he was a master, and he said he was. Then he said he needed to get somewhere, and he must be off. So, that was it. He left. So, how do you become a master? Unfortunately, you can only become a master by being taught by a master. There is no true other way to become one. Where did the first master come from, since there was no one before him? Not sure. We were able to trace back several thousands of years, but the rest is illegible. I would say only masters know where the first one came from. Chiron nodded, but was unsure of what to say. It was like listening to someone who was cosplaying a character from a game or a movie. It was surreal, in a sense, and yet it felt completely off, like he was not supposed to know. Technically, if he would have not ventured off his path to the second facility, he would have never met Wolfram or seen the lurking shadow. Then he remembered something the professor had said. The lurking shadow had not been seen for over 200 years. This means Wolfram is well over 200 years old, as he was already an adult when he arrived here. Chiron watched him as he inspected the refrigerator in the open kitchen living area. He kept opening and closing it, watching the light go out right before the door was completely shut. Then he felt the cold coming from inside, but the heat coming from the bottom. He then took one of the cans inside of half-eaten soup and sniffed it, then looked back at it with a queer look. It was rather funny watching him reacting to these everyday items. When suddenly, Wolfram turned his back against the counter, dropping the can of soup on the floor. What is it? Chiron stood as he asked, glancing around. Another rip! It's opening in here! Wolfram stammered. In here! Get back! Wolfram said as he shoved Chiron back to the door of the facility, away from the kitchen. Wolfram watched with caution as the silence rang on for Chiron. He waited a moment before looking at Wolfram. But also like the strange sound that the large light bulbs in supermarkets make. The far wall of the kitchen, which happened to be a window, began growing blurry and hazy before an ultra-pale blue light appeared in a warbling line and stretching from the floor to the ceiling. What's coming out? Chiron whispered. I don't know. Whatever it is, I've never felt anything like it before. That's becoming a common thing for you. Hush, it's opening. The line quickly shot open into an oval as he saw fog and grass from inside the rip. They both stared at it for several moments, but nothing came out. Perhaps nothing is coming out. No, son. Something is approaching the rip. Within nearly a minute came the sound of sluggish footsteps through the grass. Chiron and Wolfram watched closely as the tip of a dirty boot appeared. Then pant legs followed by a tattered shirt. Both of them watched with their eyes wide as a boy appeared through the rip. But this was no ordinary boy. Chiron was about to go for his gun when Wolfram stopped him. Wait, son. The corpse of a boy glanced around the facility, stopping on them only for a moment before continuing on. It looked up and then around once more. What happened here? It wheezed. What? Chiron glanced at Wolfram and questioned him and the insanity of what the hell was happening right before his eyes. A corpse that stood before them, awake and aware. This house, it's afraid, it stated hoarsely. What do you mean? Wolfram asked the corpse boy. The boy stood with his limbs dangling limply by his sides and his shoulders slouched like an irritated teenager told to clean their room. He had little expression, and his eyelids were absent from his face. Beneath his eyes was a deep purple, while the orbital was sunken greatly. When he spoke, it was apparent his gums had been receding from the length of his teeth. His skin withered and had turned an array of rotting colors consisting mainly of blue and purple. There were clumps of dirt in his hair, as well as his tattered clothing. He seemed like he may have reached the age of 17 before passing away, or whatever happened to him. Chiron's skin crawled thinking of how the boy looked like the dead walking. Perhaps he was. Chiron had seen enough in the past 48 hours to believe nearly anything at this rate.
"This house,"
he began as he gazed around at the ceiling as if he were watching sounds were coming from.
"It's whispering like an apartment complex."
Chiron and Wolfram looked at one another. Chiron knew Wolfram had not a clue what the boy meant by that, but this gave Chiron more goosebumps. "A complex?" Chiron questioned. "Who are you?" Wolfram questioned.
"Lucas."
"Where did you come from, Lucas?" Chiron inquired this time.
"I lived in Ridgeboro,
"Where is that?"
Narcansa."
"Kansas?"
"No, Narcansa, the province neighboring Limbara."
Wolfram and Chiron looked at one another, furrowing their brow again. Chiron saw that Wolfram was unaware of what place this was as well. "How did you find us?"
"I've been wandering the same property for what feels like an eternity. I saw an opening ahead that appeared I could cross-access. I walked to the opening and stepped through. Here I am,"
Lucas said as he glanced around and weakly threw his hands up, then allowed them to fall by his sides. As his hands hit his legs, dust blew from around them and floated slowly to the ground. He glanced down, then back to them.
"I'm sorry about that."
"What happened to you?" Lucas looked down at himself and then examined his hands as he peered back up, grimacing.
"I don't rightly know. I went to visit this girl from a school and everything changed. Her house was suddenly abandoned and wrecked, but when I entered, it was clean and beautiful. I saw her on the 3rd level and ascended the stairs, but when I did, I kept hearing the house saying, 'Run.' But then I heard her behind me and it's like she died in front of me and screamed for me to run too. Something hit me and threw me through the 3rd-story banister. I blacked out and woke up suffocating and I couldn't see. Eventually I was able to see and saw my reflection in a broken piece of glass on the lawn. I died, I assumed. There was a thick fog that would not allow me to pass the property line, and I heard screaming rather often. But it was far off, and I could never see anyone. It remains dusk, always, never day, never night."
"Carmen?" Chiron and Wolfram met eyes again and said her name in unison.
"Her name was Claire,"
Lucas stated. "What did she look like?" Wolfram inquired.
"She had long black hair and pale blue eyes."
Chiron eyed Wolfram as he turned to Chiron.
"Why do you ask? Why are you reacting this way?"
Lucas asked. "How long did you know her?" Wolfram questioned intensely.
"She was new at school. I did not know her long. She was quiet."
"Did anyone else get to see her or talk to her?"
"No, I was the only one who spoke to her."
"Did anyone else see her?" Wolfram pressed.
"I'm unsure. They gave her no attention to her. The teachers did not call her name. I figured it was because she was new and not on the roll call yet."
"I'm sure it was her.
"But how?"
Wolfram turned to Chiron with a little color on his face. "I also believe he's from another dimension, rather than time," he said as he pointed to Lucas. "I bet." He began as he walked over to the rip that was still remaining open and glanced inside. Wait, I have an idea, Kyron said as he made his way over to the rip, while Wolfram stepped aside. Kyron pulled out a sample gun and stuck it next to the rip, then scanned. He watched the screen pass the typical 5-second results time frame and continue analyzing as he furrowed his brow. Then finally the basic section showed up, displaying unknown. No time, components, or anything. Flipping it to the advanced section, he read the advanced properties as Kyron felt strong speculation. Mass, 2 times 10 to the negative 30th power. Electric charge, Q to the second power, plus, parentheses J over M, parentheses to the second power, greater than M to the second power. Density, infinity minus infinity. Compounds, astatine, unknown element, unknown element, unknown element, unknown compound. Other detected, dark matter, degenerative matter, radiation, unknown degenerative compound.
What is that thing?
Wolfram asked. It's a sample gun given to me by the biology center, the same who sent me on this mission. So far, it's been able to tell me everything, but this is definitely new. I've never received an unknown before. Wait, I have actually. Wolfram watched as Kyron ran to the door and stuck the gun to the dry patch of the earth just outside his doorstep and scanned. Once it reached analyzing, he shut the door quickly behind him and returned to the Wolfram and Lucas. I was right. There was an unknown degenerative compound found when I first got here. It was detected in the Baron's circle around this facility. Is this connected? Kyron asked as he turned to Wolfram.
Which also means that the rip will be closing soon, especially with its mass being so significant and seemingly unstable. The density of this I do not understand. These are not the same properties I use in order to create the rips to travel. Radiation and astatine are also left out of the equation, and I typically shut it myself. This one, however, seems to have a timer on it with those decaying compounds. I do wonder how it came to be with so many degenerative properties.
I don't know. Actually, I wonder. Kyron said as he pulled the sampler back out and aimed it at Lucas. Analyzing. To Kyron's surprise, it showed the same properties as the rip, minus the same mass and density. However, one thing he noticed was there was no degenerative properties. It's as if he decayed once and he woke. The decay process ceased immediately. What alarmed him was that the sampler had detected dark matter on Lucas. Lucas, Kyron began. How long did you say you've been there? He said as he pointed to the rip.
I don't know. It felt like an eternity.
Wolfram and Kyron looked at one another again.
If I may,
Lucas began.
I am aware of my grotesque appearance, but I mean you no harm.
That's not necessarily what we're concerned of, Wolfram reassured.
It's the girl. I'm not able to piece together how she was able to do this to you. It's as if your soul went dormant while your body died and began to rot, but then you woke, and your body's almost frozen in time. No decaying properties were found on you. I don't know how that's possible. How did you not lose your mind? That I don't know either. I grew very bored early. After the shock left me, seeing myself in this state, I explored the property and then the home. I did this many times. So many times, I felt like I had searched everywhere and found not a clue as to what happened to me or why. I come to the realization that there was no way out. I could not pass the foggy threshold and go down to the street, as I had when I arrived at the house. I occasionally heard screaming and saw silhouettes running. Eventually, I stopped trying to approach them. I called out for help. Not a single person, or I assumed they were people, Stop to investigate the situation further.
You had a barrier that no one else could see but yourself, Wolfram mentioned as he caressed his chin and paced the floor. What did you say the house said? The house spoke? Chiron asked as he furrowed his brow. Someone hasn't been listening carefully, have they? Wolfram smiled snarkily at Chiron. Looking back to Lucas, he asked again.
It only said one word. Run.
Run, eh? It was definitely a warning you did not heed, but how were you to know? Did you hear houses before? I think you'd mentioned this place said something too, right?
That's right. It's still talking, but they're all whispers. They're not screaming. Most apartment complexes would have a few screamers, but this one seems to be only full of whisperers.
When you came in here, what did the whispers say?
It's difficult to hear them when they're all talking at once, but sometimes you can make out some of them only if you listen closely. One of the first things I heard when I just come through that hole there is one said, it seeks, it grieves, it mourns. Another thing that really stuck out to me was this. Why does this keep happening?
Wolfram raises his brow, but only for a moment. Again? Chiron repeated. What exactly keeps happening?
Sometimes they answer me and sometimes they act as if I'm not there,
Lucas mentioned. Can you ask what they mean? Lucas gazed up as his eyes slowly moved across the ceiling. Wolfram and Chiron watched silently as Lucas listened.
There were others before you,
Lucas stated as he looked at Chiron.
The people keep sending others in, and they've all perished after leaving this building, all in different ways.
How does this place know since they depart before dying? Lucas again looked up and listened to the whispers, answering Chiron's question.
We're all connected, they said.
What does that mean? Chiron asked as he looked to the ceiling as well.
The shadows,
Lucas said softly,
are all connected.
Like a hive mind, Wolfram muttered.
The one named Chiron, they are confused by him.
Chiron jerked his sights on Wolfram. What? They're confused about me? Lucas looked at Chiron.
So you're Chiron.
He gazed up and listened again.
They speak of you showing compassion for one, but not the other.
What does that even mean? Chiron felt the sweat beating on his forehead as a knot formed in his throat.
You gave a substance to a shadow creature in disguise, but then greatly injured another. Recently, from what it sounds like.
Chiron continued to stare at Wolfram. Are they talking about Carmen?
She is a split soul.
Lucas began speaking almost dreamily as he gazed up.
She had a tortured beginning and has met only torture with no end in sight. She is now we. Her soul is alive, but only enough to keep her physical body from perishing.
Lucas stopped a moment and furrowed his brow, or the best that he could with the lack of lids that he had to add to his expression.
A human soul once removed from the body will ascend and the body will rot. But if the soul does not ascend, the body will remain.
So her body will grow old but will never die? Chiron thought out loud.
The girl, she had a name before she was withdrawn. Carmen was the name given to the body when it was sent into another. Where and when?
Lucas looked to both of them and seemed rather alarmed.
They silenced themselves. What's going on here? What did I walk into?
Lucas asked. Chiron stared at the decayed boy, and it was then he began asking himself if he had gone completely mad and had a psychotic break from reality. This went well beyond his comprehension and his ability to believe what he was seeing and hearing. A dabbler? caused time rips throughout different times and dimensions, who caused a massive catastrophic event due to an error when traveling, a girl whose soul was sucked from her body and replaced with a shadow, and her soul was essentially forced into oblivion, where these abominations of godlike proportions got a hold of her. Now she's a part of this deadly shadow creature that's basically after this Mr. Dabbler who ultimately killed his family by frost. Now we have some other kid affected by all this who died and then came back to life and can talk to buildings. What the actual fuck is going on here? Wolfram gazed at Lucas and then looked to Chiron with a heavy sigh. This is worse than I could have ever imagined. I believe I may know how to fix this, but we have to find something that will likely be nearly impossible to obtain. And what would that be? Chiron said sarcastically. Why am I even involved with this anymore? I've obviously lost my mind. There's no way a corpse kid who can talk to freaking houses is here from another dimension. And you, he went on as he pointed to Wolfram, there is no way some magician came from another dimension who caused all this shit to happen. He exacerbated as he held his arms out as if to show what he had done. I supposed to find the cure for cancer, not find the world's most fucked up situation ever to be thought up. Chiron, Wolfram began, just because you don't understand it does not mean that it isn't real. I'm hallucinating, that's all this is. We all feel this way at some point in our life, son. Really, dude? Really? Chiron turned and held his arms out again when he realized the street in him was coming out in his voice. Something that felt like it was distant enough to be from another lifetime. What else am I going to find? What else am I going to get involved with? Look, this has been fun and all, but I need to go get to that third facility tomorrow. Lucas looked up and then at Chiron with sad eyes. What now? Let me guess. I'm going to now be talking to a tree that used to be someone's grandma? Chiron. They're saying that there's no third facility. Lucas said lowly. Chiron stared at Lucas, but his expression never faltered. What? He whispered. Shaking his head, he pinched the bridge of his nose and looked up as he placed his hands on his hips. What am I even doing here? They knew I was going to die before they even sent me. Who? The stupid lab that was always my dream to work at. They all knew I was going to die. They didn't even care about me. They just sent me to my death to find out as much as I could for them. Lucas furrowed his brow. They're not what you think they are. It's a front. What are they then? Chiron nearly whimpered. He had not felt this hopeless since he was in the hospital withdrawing. Even the facility knows, but it's aware they are something else, and without good intention. From what this facility's saying, something was taken by Wolfram. Lucas finished as he looked at the old man. I only wanted to make things right, Wolfram whispered. What did you take? Wolfram looked to Chiron wearily and sighed. It's an ancient artifact. Its power is of epic proportions, and there is at least one in every dimension. They are said to be the only able to be unlocked by masters. I wanted to get my family back. I wanted to save the little girl's life. Take everything back the way it was. I finally found one and had tried my damnedest to make myself a master on my own. Wait, was it one of those things I took from your cabin? Chiron asked. Sounds like there's been a lot of stealing around here, Lucas mentioned. It looks a lot like a rock shaped like an ursine. They're indestructible. It looks a lot like a rock shaped like an ursine. They're indestructible. Hold on, Lucas said as he held out his gnarled hands for a moment. A bear? He began digging in his worn pockets and pulled out a small rock in the shape none other than a bear. Wolfram's eyes grew wide as he looked up at Lucas. Where did you get that? Wolfram asked, nearly breathless.
I thought the girl from school had dropped it, and I was going to bring it back to her when all of that happened. I had forgotten about it, honestly,
Lucas said as he examined it in his ashen palm. What happens if more than one of those things are together? Karen inquired.
I don't know, boy. Masters had never been able to do such a thing before, to my knowledge at least. Do you still have that small box that you took from the other room at my house?
Yeah, but I think the key fell down in the floorboards back at the cabin.
No matter. I can open it myself, Wolfram said. Hand it here, son.
Karen took his bag and began digging through it until pulling out the little box and handed it to Wolfram. He moved his hand in a strange way and muttered something when a faint click could be heard. Opening the box, Karen saw a rock identical to the one in Lucas's hand. Wolfram gave Lucas a come-hither motion. Lucas placed the rock in his hand. Wolfram sat himself down on the floor with a groan and looked at the two stones. Holding the two stones out in front of him, he began moving his hands closer together. As they grew closer, Lucas and Karen stepped back, glancing at one another. They were within an inch of one another when Wolfram suddenly pushed them together. They clanked just as two rocks would together, but nothing seemed to happen. Wolfram sighed as he dropped his limbs in his lap.
Well, I guess I must be a master before they even react. Well, that was disappointing,
Lucas mentioned offhandedly.
You're telling me?
Wolfram frowned. While we're here, Wolfram, where did you get these photographs? Karen asked as he pulled the 3 frames out and laid them on the floor in front of him. Karen sat down across from him.
That's clear!
Lucas started as he pointed to the picture of the girl in front of the woods.
That is Carmen, dear Lucas.
Lucas's hand dropped as he looked at the photo indifferently. Karen knew that Lucas was feeling a deep sadness, though he clearly couldn't relate to his situation. Several feet from them came an electrical hissing before electricity scattered chaotically around the rip, as it closed up within the blink of an eye, leaving behind a strange thundering sound that quickly died.
Guess that's definitely no way of getting home now,
Lucas exhaled. It's not like your home was still even there. It's untelling how long you've been there in that state. At least you can wander further than the property line now.
I suppose you're right. But
Lucas looked at his hands.
It's not like I'll ever have a normal life now. Son, I will do what I can to find a cure for that.
How many things are you going to take on when you don't even know if you can do anything about it? Karen asked rather aggressively.
I have to try. That poor kid wouldn't be in that state he's in if I wouldn't have made that one mistake. Same as for that family. Same for my family. The little girl.
Didn't the facility say that she had a name before Carmen? Lucas looked up a moment before shaking his head.
They don't seem to want to talk. If I can find out her real name, I might be able to at least save her first. That would buy us some time since her soul's intertwined with that shadow from the in-between. They mentioned her soul was split.
What does that exactly mean, Wolfram? Wolfram nodded to one side as he nonplussed.
Well, it makes things much harder. That I know for sure. But it doesn't make it impossible to work through. Think of the knots in someone's hair. You could cut the hair off, sure, which in this situation I don't believe you can. Or you can carefully work the knot out. Difficult, but not impossible.
You're willing to basically unravel the hair on a toddler's head while having angry bees flying around stinging you? Karen emphasized.
If you hadn't noticed before, she will kill me if I don't do something, whether it be her doing or whatever she's spliced with. If she kills me, there's no way to save anyone else. This will only get worse. The rips are becoming more often.
Karen glanced at Lucas, who was standing in front of a mirror in the kitchen with a massive grimace on his face, though most of his teeth could be seen from his receded lips. His shoulders were slouched as he stared at the figure before him, one that was once full of life and was now essentially a walking corpse. Do you eat? Karen questioned. Lucas turned and glanced around a moment before pointing his thumb at his chest, Kyron nodded.
I haven't been eating in so long I don't know. I don't think this body can.
What was the last thing you remember eating? Lucas did a motion as if to purse his lips and looked in the corner of his eye.
I think I had Korsnick sandwich with chips.
I don't know what a Korsnick is, but I do know what chips are.
You don't know what a Korsnick is?
Lucas seemed rather surprised. What is it? Is it like bologna?
Bologna? Korsnick is a four-legged creature animal. It's feathered with a snout but does not fly. They can flap with their heavily feathered legs, but this only makes them run faster instead of flying, like other feather animals.
That sounds like a weird chicken.
Chicken? What are they?
Chicken is like you described, but only has 2 legs instead of a snout. It has a beak. They can't really fly either, though they have feathers. They flap to run faster.
They have feathers and wings, but can't fly?
Yeah, just like you mentioned. They're super similar, aren't they?
I guess. Huh.
Lucas seemed to be temporarily distracted by his appearance, to Kyron's relief. He then wondered why he cared about the dead kid even thought. He glanced at Wolfram and had a thought. Did either of you have cows?
We had cattle,
Wolfram responded as if Kyron asked him a redundant question.
What you mean, did we have cows?
Well, Lucas and I were just talking about our mammal differences. He doesn't have chicken, but something called a Korsnick, which is similar to chicken.
Course they're different mammals, son. My world and your world are parallel almost. Just major time differences. We are from the same dimension, just another time. Lucas is from a parallel dimension. Things are at least a little different from where he came from.
Kyron could see that this struck Lucas even further than he had before, singling him out and how different he was after finally finding someone to socialize with. But isn't it cool? Kyron said as he turned back to Lucas but eyed Wolfram intensely. Wolfram narrowed his eyes, then smiled and chuckled.
All right, I see. Either you boys like to have a smoke?
You smoke?
Sure I do. Haven't had a chance yet, so wouldn't mind after the day I've had.
Kyron and Lucas looked at one another and smirked. Lucas's smile faded right away.
Can I even smoke? Do I have lungs left enough to? Surely you do, since you can talk. Then you got enough lungs to still function enough to push air through your larynx to speak.
This put a smile back on Lucas.
You got a window in here, Kyron? Not exactly comfortable walking outside after dark.
Not exactly the one you're thinking of, but I do have something you may like. Kyron led both of them to the far end of the facility, where the wall made completely of glass lay, as they both looked in awe at the sight before them. It has really nice ventilation system in this place to filter out any spores and other dangerous materials, so anything smoked should be filtered out pretty quickly. Wolfram slapped Kyron on the back.
Ha ha, my boy, good thinking.
Kyron felt a sudden discomfort when he was reminded of having this as a near deja vu experience not even a month, and when Byron did almost the same thing to him. He immediately felt distrust towards Wolfram and his intentions. Did he even want to actually save the little girl Carmen? Did he want his family back? What were his real motives? This brought him back to the way he was introduced to the old man. He glanced at Lucas, who stood before the glass, as he gazed upon the outside world, which must have been infinitely lusher than the dead plane he lived on before, however many years. The poor kid had been living alone for such a long time, and obviously had low self-esteem. Being half-rotted did not help his esteem of his appearance at all. Kyron chuckled at the thought and then felt a pang of pity. Turning to Wolfram, he saw he had already sat down on the floor and began rolling tobacco that he had pulled from a small purse from his pocket. Kyron sat down to the right of Wolfram, whereas Lucas stood to Kyron's right while he peered out at the beauty. Kyron realized he was living down memory lane tonight and had gotten rather emotional today. Is it a full moon? He thought with a smirk. Jeremiah had been staring out a broken window on a somewhat chilly night after Kyle had gotten high out of his mind and passed out. Kyron sat nearby watching Kyle to ensure he did not roll on his back while observing Jeremiah. He had to get between them today. It wasn't the first time, however. It was often he had to come between them when they had their disagreements. Jeremiah seemed to have something peculiar on his mind tonight. Kyle had passed out nearly 30 minutes ago, and Jeremiah appeared as if he did not know he was not alone. He was absorbed in what he was doing, thinking and gazing, but not really seeing, remembering but still seeing what was in front of him in nearly mythical type of view. "You all right over there, Jeremiah?" Jeremiah never turned. He did not acknowledge that he had even heard. Kyron knew he was in deep thought and needed to be left as is until he came to. There was a point when someone was making themselves depressed with what they could not change, but there was also a time to intervene with someone who was growing depressed with things that they could change, but didn't know how. Sometimes they needed to think things through. Sometimes they needed to be snapped out of it so it wouldn't drive them mad. Sometimes they needed to reflect on their mistakes and learn from them. But then again, there were times when they had the shovel and were only digging themselves further. This was that time. "Jeremiah, man, want to talk?" Kyron said a bit louder this time. Jeremiah turned and gave Kyron a sad smile. He shook his head. "Why can't you just let me be sad, Kyron? That tough-ass little bitch is asleep. Let me be." Kyron said nothing. Jeremiah turned back to reflect as he peered out over the city lights. The sound of water droplets pattering down on the metal close by, while the dampened sound of it hitting plastic was washed away with the oncoming downpour. Kyron had trouble accepting when someone was low. He wanted to help. When his help was rejected, he was unsure of what to do next, but simply watched them hurt. Sometimes people want to hurt alone, and Kyron still to this day was troubled with accepting that. Sure, he wanted to be alone when he was hurting, but he could not wrap it around his head for others to feel the need to suffer in silence and solitude.
Alright, boys. Got ourselves one to pass around while I work on another. Until then, let's sit and smoke and palaver. I think we've all had enough excitement for today. At least for one day, don't you think?
Wolfern advised as he held up a tightly rolled cigarette. Kyron motioned for Lucas to come sit with them. Lucas looked rather queer at them and then looked to his feet.
I might need help getting back up. I'm not exactly toned anymore. "'Sight, son,"
Wolfern smiled.
"We'll get you back on your feet."
Lucas came and plopped his rump next to Kyron's as they all gazed out the window. Kyron looked at the cigarette and wished he had menthol smoke, but this would do. He then recalled he had not had a smoke since the morning before treading back to the cabin to stumble upon Wolfram for the first time. It felt like it was not the same day, but more like a week ago. Time was strange in this place. Either that or his day had been filled to the brim, and most had left the head by now, as he sat with an ancient dabbler and a living dead kid who didn't eat brains. He took a long drag and closed his eyes as he inhaled the heat, feeling the nicotine rushing into him and feeling such relief at its reintroduction. Slowly exhaling, he cracked his eyes as he passed it to Lucas, who hesitantly took it. Lucas looked at the cigarette with such worry before Wolfram spoke up.
"Son, if you're that nervous, you don't have to. It's an offer, not an obligation."
Lucas shrugged.
"It's not like I'm gonna get cancer anyway."
He took a small, short drag from the cigarette and then almost immediately blew it out, but did not cough.
"Tastes gross,"
he muttered before taking another. Wolfern and Kyron chuckled. "So, where did you come from, Lucas?" Lucas passed the cigarette back to Wolfern as he began puffing, setting the next one he was rolling down on the floor in front of him.
"I was a junior in high school. Nerdy kid to beat it all. My family moved around often, so I wasn't exactly good friend material. The ones I did make friends with, I lost contact with right away once we had to pack up and leave again. My mom worked from home while my dad had a job that required us to always be on the go. I liked reading mainly and playing games."
"So when did you start talking to houses?" Lucas made an eye-rolling motion, then a look of disbelief.
"As long as I can remember. I brought it up to my parents at one point, and they told me I was critically ill and needed to be admitted. I stopped talking about it after that because everything else about me was basically normal as it could be, painfully bland.
What's the scariest thing you've ever heard a building say? Kyron asked as he took the cigarette from Wolfram and took a drag.
Well, other than where I died, I guess it would have to be the house that I'm convinced was haunted.
Haunted, huh? Wolfram grunted.
Well, yeah. It was much different than the other buildings talking, houses included. I'm not going to include hospitals in the equation. Those are by far the most disturbing. Hearing things like, hearing it repeating the saddest words spoken or words of pain. Things like, no, you can't just let her die, or don't leave me, God, don't leave me now. Other than that, I would have to say an apartment we moved into when I was just sitting at the ripe age of 14. We moved in, and the first time I set foot inside, it started growling.
Growling? Kyron repeated as he took another drag and passed it to Lucas.
That's right. I can't say I've ever heard another place growl, but that one did. I didn't know what to think and considered I was just hearing a storm far off rumbling. We started moving in, and I noticed that it was continuing on. But the sky was not darkening at all. Late that night, when I was lying down in bed, it finally spoke. Keep in mind, in an apartment complex, there's an awful lot of talk because there are several living spaces, and each of them is considered its own home or entity.
Lucas took his own drag and then grated his tongue against his teeth, wiping a stringy residue left behind with his shirt with a nonchalant,
"Sorry." It said, "Leave us." Not me, but us, meaning all of them. They typically never took notice of the others around them and would refer to themselves as a single thing, not multiple. So it growled quite a bit, and it was more than one, which were two things that I had never experienced before.
Really? So the apartments never noticed one another?
Yeah, think of them like flies. They're really just aware of themselves, even when swarming around a carcass with 100 other of you. They don't care. They're only focused on themselves and their goals, never taking note of others around them. But this one was different.
So what happened?
Well, I couldn't tell my parents about it, of course. But I was more than eager to leave. I had no friends to stay the night with, but I would spend most of my time outside reading to avoid being inside. That led my parents to believe I was doing drugs, but that's another story. Bad things started happening in about a week. Paranormal stuff. Things being thrown around, the items mysteriously breaking or going missing. They always thought it was me. I was about to be sent to a school for defiant children when it finally happened in front of them. I was picked up and thrown through the front window. I was cut up pretty bad and had to get stitches for it. They didn't think it was me anymore, but they brought in a ghost hunter and such. That did no good, obviously. I heard the apartment laughing at them. It was like listening to one of those old soundtracks of laughter on those old kid shows. Laughing all around. They then went to a priest to cleanse the place. It only ensued more laughter. Sometimes I could hear them mocking the priest. He tried to do his work, but this was not a job for him. Neither one was. There weren't ghosts or demons.
Shadows, Wolfram muttered. What? Kyron furrowed his brow as he looked at him as he passed back from Lucas to the old man.
Shadows, Kyron, damn. I figured you would have caught on by now, boy. Shadows rule all. Have you not noticed that? Shadows become people, objects, domains. That's where them stupid stories of haunted house and objects come from. That you briefly told me about on our journey to your metal dome of yours here. Shadows can lie dormant inside homes too. They find shelter and sometimes they'll blend into the domain. You had mentioned those horror stories of yours, where if the house is destroyed, so is the evil spirit. That's actually a shadow being destroyed with the item that it thought would hold forever. Some shadows are not exactly bright, while others know better. I have never seen a shadow cleverer than the one who took the girl we call Carmen. Second in line is the one who intertwined with a soul. They both sure as hell knew what they were doing."
Kyra nearly gaped at Wolfram before turning back to Lucas, who seemed to have at least an inkling of understanding of what the old man was saying. Kyron thought he understood, but again, he could not wrap his mind around it. So, haunted houses were a real thing and were dominated by not demons, but shadows? Shadows. Not spirits, not ghouls or poltergeists, but shadows.
"What's a shadow, Kyron?"
Wolfram challenged. Well, it's the absence of light, where something is blocking light like an object from the light source and—
"Wrong!" "Partially right, but wrong,"
Wolfram interjected. Lucas only watched expressionless.
"Shadows are echoes, just as what the buildings are repeating to Lucas. Just echoes of what once was there, but are no longer. Perhaps powerful emotions created them. Maybe, just as you said, something blocking the light. Those shadows are like, a reference used by Lucas here, flies. They don't really have a mind of their own. They're mainly just there, like a dumb animal only running off of dull instinct. Stupid. However, some of them are intelligent, far more than others. Seldom you'll find one that is more intelligent than you."
Wait, I thought you said that no one has ever opened the in-between before, so how are these shadows even here?
There have been instances in what we dabblers call leaks. Leaks are where there is an overfilled area in the in-between, and it essentially spills out somewhere else. They are always shadows that are dumb and have little to no sentient mind to them. Again, like flies. So intelligent ones are not going to congregate to the point of spilling over. Those things, as far as I'm aware, are rare. So there are not many of them.
Kyron furrowed his brow as he looked down to his feet.
"We have found at least 2 here, if not 3.
"3?" Kyron gawked.
"Carmen? Or the Umbra?"
Wolfram stated as he held up a single finger.
"The unnamed shadow who took her body?"
he declared as the second finger held itself next to the first.
"And then, one that you might not put much thought into. One I watched myself and never cared to tell you of, the wolf."
He held up a third finger and stared at Kyron through them. "The wolf, then stopped. The Dark Watcher," he thought.
"Aye. It's likely the one you're thinking of now. I know not what to call the creature, but it is not what you think it is. They do not eat and they do not sleep."
"But it took part of my protein bar," Kyron said as he felt slightly hurt.
"It wanted to know if it could trust,"
Wolfram emphasized.
"Use."
"Use? It used me to find you?"
"Aye, likely.
But how?"
"It gained your trust. It watched you."
"The Dark Watcher actually watched me?" Kyron breathed.
"Kyron,"
Lucas said, nearly dreamlike.
"What else have you interacted with here? I've not been here long, but—"
Wolfram eyed Kyron, as did Lucas, but the dead kid seemed to have much more fear in his eyes than Wolfram, despite the fact that the old man was marked. Wolfram seemed more indifferent than he had ever been before. "A lot of plants I've collected."
"Creatures, son."
I think that's the only one that I know of, other than the dead ones," Kyron uttered.
"Are you sure?"
"I'm positive." Lucas looked at Wolfram as Kyron stared ahead through the window. What if they're listening now? They all sat in silence as they peered straight out the window, with the waft of smoke floating elegantly from the ashed end. Wolfram took a rather long drag and then mashed the cigarette into the metal flooring, putting it out. He then lit the next one that he had rolled and took another drag, blowing it out with force enough to cause it to expand into a mushroom cloud against the glass. It billowed around in the clouds before slowly disappearing in the air.
"Why hath the conversation ceased?"
Lucas said dreamily as he turned to them with his eyes directly on the two of them. Wolfram only gave a single nod. Instead of his finger, he raised the unlit end of the cigarette to his lips and pointed it down for only a moment to give Kyron a hushing motion. Kyron nodded. "So, guys, I have something really cool to show you," Kyron exclaimed as he stood quickly and held out his arms with an unrealistic smile on his face. He stepped into the other room and then came back with a tattered book and sat back down between them. "This was the booklet the center gave me before leaving. Take a look at some of these cool plants that they gave me to find. Some even have medical properties. Cool, right?" Kyron opened to the blank section and pointed to Wolfram, a poor sketch of the shadow Carmen resided in now. "Some may even be capable of curing cancer." Wolfram took the book and set it in his lap.
"Really? That's incredible. I don't know what cancer is, but it seems to me like you have a lot of trouble with that."
Wolfram began reading the short description given for the shadow. "Yeah, it's where the cells mutate and go crazy. It usually kills people. Too bad the booklet doesn't have more information about which plants would give those healing properties, huh?"
"Indeed, Kyron. Sounds terrible. We had something called orkins. It was similar to what you said, but it's the opposite. It doesn't grow. It deteriorates your body. It was commonly known as corpse syndrome. That's why I kept you from shooting old Lucas here. I thought it might be something like that. Although I would like to ask Lucas some more questions down the road, not right at this moment. I'd like to have a bit closer look at these plants."
Wolfram glanced through the pages and nodded here and there.
"You almost shot me?"
Lucas inquired.
"I thought you were the dead walking. I didn't know." "I kind of am."
"Well, there were these things called zombies they made in horror movies. Dead bodies walking around eating live humans only. A disease that spreads rapidly. I thought it was legit, one of those ordeals."
"Not quite."
Lucas chuckled.
"Too bad I can hardly read this. You got a quill to help me translate?"
"No, but I do have a pen you can use. It's basically a futuristic quill." Kyron dug in his bag and handed a pen to Wolfram, who studied it a moment and muttered how clever it was to put the ink inside to keep from having to dip the quill repeatedly. He began scribbling and handed the book to Kyron.
"Hey, they're talking again."
"What are they saying?"
"I think we do need to look at this. They were discussing when the chamber would be accessed again. Do you know of a chamber?"
"A chamber? Other than a bed chamber?" Kyron trailed off as he furrowed his brow.
"Passcode. Soul capture."
The facility began to rumble as the floor just behind them began opening. The tiles on the floor jostled down an inch and then began to depart, revealing a stairwell. They all started as they watched the stairwell open and come to a loud bang upon stopping.
"The hell are you doing?"
Kyron hissed at Lucas.
"They were talking about something that I think we need to look into,"
Lucas said meekly.
"And what would that be?"
Wolfram did not seem as alarmed as Kyron.
"The people before, they built this facility. They were doing things here that I think your center has an idea about."
"Is it safe to really trust those voices?" Kyron asked Wolfram.
"Seems as though they wanted to show something, so might as well."
As they approached the stairwell, lights began turning on down the tunnel until they could not see any further. It appeared it went several stories underground. They looked to one another and then to Lucas. Lucas raised his brow.
"Don't look at me. Just because I'm dead doesn't mean I'm not able to die." "Doubtful, son. I bet I could tear your limb off and it wouldn't hurt." "All right, I'd rather not test that theory,"
Lucas murmured and turned to face the stairs as he swallowed audibly. He eyed them both once before descending the steps, with them following behind. "Think those doors will close behind us?"
"I wouldn't think so, since it required a passcode to get in, or whatever Lucas said."
"Are you scared?"
"Who, me? I mean, yeah."
Lucas chuckled nervously. We might want to get a move on even with us all being scared.
I can't exactly move that fast with my muscles all deteriorated and shit.
Wolfram and Chiron looked to one another nonplussed and said nothing more. Within 5 minutes of descending the stairs, they came to an opening within sight. You'd think these people would have installed an elevator.
What's that?
Don't worry about it. What's that smell? Chiron asked as he curled his nose.
Thank goodness I can't smell anymore.
That smells like a preservative. Almost like pickling something, but keeping it in its current state when submerged. Like lab rats? I don't know your ways, Chiron, but the smell's awfully strong. There must be something lodged down here. Like what exactly?
I don't know.
We'll see. Whatever it is, it's dead. As they came to the final step, they entered a massive room, at least 5 times the size of the facility upstairs. Everything here seemed to be made out of the same durable materials as well. Then another smell reached their noses. Rot! Wolfram muttered as he stepped around and sniffed in the air.
Both?
He stepped around and sniffed as he walked to the other side of the room where they came. Coming to several doors, he opened each of them, most of which looked like they had been ransacked and trashed. He then came to the second to last door. When he opened it, he slammed it shut again and gagged.
What is it?
Wolfram dry heaved and held his finger up for a moment before holding himself steady. Shaking his head, he coughed once more.
Well, found the rotten smell. It's some poor fella in here that seems like he died about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month.
Really? Chiron's thoughts went back to the red X's on the map of the divide and wondered if that was one of them. How'd he die?
Unsure. He's in a bad enough state that I can't rightly say. Could have been on purpose, but not sure. There did not seem to be any kind of wounds that would happen prior. Then again, he looks pretty bad off. No offense, Lucas,
Wolfram added. He glanced around to them and made his way to the other wall where there appeared to be a massive screen built into it.
What do you reckon's this?
Looks like a TV.
Soul capture.
The screen lit up as a short hiss came from above. Welcome. They looked at one another and then back to the screen.
Soul chamber.
Accessing Soul Chamber. Please stand by while your request is processed. From the barren wall to their left, one of the metal panels slid up, revealing a door. Your request is complete. Soul Chamber is now accessible. Please proceed with caution. Lucas and Wolfram turned, walking towards the newly revealed door. Who are you? Chiron asked, still staring up at the screen. Wolfram and Lucas turned quickly with their eyes wide.
What are you doing, son?
I am Knowledge Engineering, Individual Unspecified Embodiment, Preliminary Analyst. All personnel may refer to me as a Buick. A Buick? So what cautionary steps should we take in the Soul Chamber? All personnel must wear protective gear provided by guidelines. Please ensure to fill out your legal forms regarding liability. Well, whatever. Chiron muttered as he turned and walked to the others who had just stepped into the new room. As they did, the lights cut on, revealing a massive room. The entire place seemed to be made of the same scratchless chrome metal. Along the walls were many intricate computer hardware towers that were all at least 5 feet high, each of which had many small screens, knobs, buttons, and other lights that occasionally flashed dully. One of the towers was glass, containing a light blue liquid with floating vegetation inside. Large black hoses snaked around the floor leading to the towers, and the tanks and some went into the wall. Trays were hung just above the towers with an assortment of plants and small glass balls that seemed to have just begun to sprout. They appeared to be so alive. A clear cylinder was set upon the many tables around in an array of different vivid colors. One stood out amongst them as a neon green, as Chiron's instincts advised him to steer clear especially of this one. There was an opening between 2 of the towers, where Chiron noticed a staircase and began ascending it. The walk-up was rather tight-fit, and each step seemed to echo much too loudly for comfort. As he made it to the top of the stairs, he turned left and noticed there was an entire wraparound of the room on the second floor and could look down on the first story below. And what a sight it was from above. Not that the level view was not incredible in itself. He then noticed something in the far left corner where he had not noticed that the towers had an opening as well. It was an entirely new room, merely separated by the ancient computers. It was difficult to tell exactly what was over there, but there was a massive orb full of what appeared to be trillions of fireflies. Below was a row of rectangular tanks with many wires and tubes running along the floor, just as the rest of the lower level. At the far wall on the second floor, he noticed an area labeled History. As he approached this, he saw several buttons and reviewed each one with its purpose. "Last history capture," he whispered. He pressed the button as he heard shouting down below. Kyron grabbed the railing and peered down to see Lucas and Volfern running for the door, and a hollow green person running around shouting something in a foreign language.